Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Life of loss. Object loss or loss is a central concept in psychoanalysis. In our last episode, we have covered the landscape of object loss, and today we'll discuss deeper into this concept with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, is loss always an object loss, or is a non-object loss also possible?
Loss is a wider word than object loss. However, the way the word object is defined in psychoanalysis, it becomes almost synonymous with the word entity. And when you define object to be equivalent to an entity, then obviously nothing is left out, and uh, all loss becomes object loss. But even there, there is a exception to it, conceptually speaking, which few people know about today. And that exception is there are two opinions on whether a object-free state of the mind is possible or not. Freud was very clear that in the initial part of our life, very initial part, the first 1 or 2 weeks, or maybe slightly even more, we live in an object-free world in an oceanic state where I and not I has not happened. There is just one oceanic state. And in that oceanic state, it is a pre-object stage. And in that pre-object state, you have that feeling of primary, you have that phenomena of primary narcissism, where everything is just one oceanic whole. And in that oceanic whole, when you have the good feelings and not good feelings going up and down, there is a possibility of loss, which is not object loss because you are in a pre-object stage. Kleinians don't believe in this. Kleinians are very clear that there is nothing like a pre-object stage. We always are dealing with objects right from birth. So from a Kleinian standpoint, all laws essentially would be object laws. The way the word object is so widely defined. So for Kleinians, all laws is object laws. If I have to give an opinion, I tend to be more towards Freud than Klein, although recent empirical infant research supports Klein more. Recent empirical research suggests that uh, the object recognition and dealing with objects is very early in our life, and therefore we are always dealing with objects and we don't have a pre-object stage. But I don't agree to that. I believe that in some way we have a pre-object stage. The stage of primary narcissism is there. The stage of oceanic hole is there. Not only do we have these stages early in life, but also in spiritual experiences, we go into a supra-object stage where we don't have objects per se. There is one oceanic hole, not the oceanic hole that drowns you, but the oceanic hole that frees you and liberates you. So, looking at many patients who are in search of that bliss of primary narcissism, conceptually looking at what Freud said, and it appears to be more correct, looking at spiritual experiences of non-object stages, I personally do believe that there is a possibility of non-object stages or non-object states of the psyche, and if that is possible, then non-object loss is also possible. I mean, loss which is not an object loss is also possible in that state. Because if you have a non-object state, then a loss becomes possible in that sense. But if all psychological functioning is related with the object, then obviously there is no way else to go, but all laws will be object laws. So this is the landscape in the context of which laws and object laws get fused and get separated. Is based upon the conceptual orientation that you have.
Can we talk about some common instances of object loss in human life?
If we look at the natural program of human life, everyone is born, everyone has a childhood, everyone has uh, parents, everyone has to go to school or to some place to learn, leaving the home, everyone uh, goes for occupation, everyone gets old and everyone dies. If you look at this natural program of life, object loss is inevitably built into life. By the even if there are no tragedies, just by the very nature of the program of life, so all of us have to give up our pleasures of infancy to grow up and do things by ourselves. So there is a loss built into it naturally. The loss of all providing parents, the first loss, where we are expected to do things on our own. Then we have, once we go to school, there is loss of home and loss of family to some extent. Then when we move from school to the college, there is loss of friends, there is loss of the school, there is loss of teachers and so on. Then we move from the college to the work area. Again, we have losses of friends, teachers, places and so on. In the work area, we move to different places. We work with different people and many people leave us, many people join us. So inevitably object loss and object gain keep happening all the time. And then as we grow old, or we get into middle age, the children start moving away and therefore another set of losses comes in. Then our parents start dying or our relatives start dying and another sort of losses comes in. And finally, as we get old, we get more and more lonely. People are lost in their own worlds and we have a psychological loss with relation in terms of relating to people. And finally, of course, we lose people around us who are our contemporaries. Right? And finally, we also pass off. And as we pass off, we create an object loss for somebody else. So, uh, object loss is naturally built into human life. This is even without a single tragedy. Now, when you bring in the element of tragedy, it compounds the problem of object loss. So, one, there is nothing like an object loss free human life, but you can have a non traumatic, non pathological object loss oriented human life. And then when you add the element of tragedy, it becomes compounded and pathological. And when it becomes compounded and pathological, then we have object losses which involve parents not being available for a long time and the child thinks he has been abandoned. In real life, parents may not be actually available. Maybe the parents leave the child or parents die and child is orphaned. Maybe the parents divorce and the child feels left alone with one parent. Maybe some relative dies, some friend moves to some other school and you feel the loss of the object. Maybe the job is transferable and therefore as your parents move from one city to the other, you have to break all the bonds you have created in one city and that is an object loss. And then comes the whole phase of falling in love and falling out of love and object loss is related to that. And then you have object losses related to trying to figure out or trying to get the ideal parent figure at the job place, occupation place, workplace, or somewhere else in the spiritual arena or wherever. And these are, and then you have accidents. All this put together, they create a second layer of compounded or pathology creating or traumatic object loss. So you have two types, the natural object losses and the traumatic object losses. In the way the conditions on Earth are, uh, it almost looks like this planet is designed to give challenges, difficulties, and one of the difficulties is the difficulty of object loss. Uh,
Can we say that there is an inherent or an internal object loss during the process of growing up, and an external object loss or an object loss in the external world of the person?
yes, because there are two types of object losses we can divide into. One is the real physical loss in the real world, and second is
Right.
the subjective loss felt inside. For example, let us say for a child, uh, if one of the parent dies, that's a real loss, a real physical loss. But if the parent is not available for 2 days, he has gone out, but the child feels he has been abandoned. He feels object loss. And after the parent comes back, the child is not able to undo the traumatic event that happened. Now that is a very subjective psychological object loss, which depends to a great extent on the constitution also.
Okay. How does this phenomenon of object loss take place? I mean, is there a process to it?
Yes, there is a generic process, and it has been commented upon by leading psychoanalytic masters. The generic process is there is a need for an object, there is a search for an object, there is a desperation for an object, there is a waiting for an object, there is anger, helplessness, powerlessness, pain, and fear. And then, possibly, if fortune is good, a healthy mourning. So, this is a very natural and essential uh, sort of sequence of object loss. It works in most of the cases. I'm not saying all the cases, but a great majority of the cases. In essential terms, this is the kind of process that happens. But people have detailed out in other specific terms about this process of object loss as to what it does to us. And let us take up the first uh, explanation given by Sigmund Freud. What he says is that we really don't have a mechanism or the ability to process an object loss fully. And of course, he was referring to object loss of objects where we are strongly invested in. Because more we are invested in something, more acutely is the loss of that object felt. I mean, you don't feel object loss of somebody you hate. There are many objects in this world where we pray to God that we should have an object loss, but it does not happen. Right? So that's a different category of objects where we pray to God for object loss. Okay? But Freud is not referring to those objects. In those cases, we would say good riddance. But Freud is referring to those objects where we are emotionally invested in. And Freud says that in those cases, we really don't have any mechanism or capacity to successfully process the whole thing completely in a very efficient way. So the process, what happens is this. Part of the pain and the affect is processed in mourning, but part of it cannot be mourned, and therefore we have to deny to different degrees the object loss. And the mechanism of denial is this: we make that lost object a part of ourselves, which means whatever object we have lost, some characteristic of that object we put into ourselves and we modify our personality slightly. For example, I lose somebody who had the habit of smoking cigarettes, and after I lose him, I start smoking cigarettes. Now, what I have done is I have modified myself to acquire some characteristic of the lost object so that my unconscious mind can deny that the object is lost. The object is not lost because the object is still smoking cigarettes. So through the psychological mechanism of acquiring a habit and identification, the defense of denial is used. So we modify our personality by including some part of that person inside of us. And because that part survives, we trick ourselves into saying that person survives, that person is not gone. And Freud says if we look at our personality, there is a substantial part of our personality which is created by continuous modification of ourselves to cope up with all the losses that we have felt, we have experienced. So a very strong component of our personality is actually accumulation of all the losses we have undergone. Because for every loss, every strong loss, we have modified ourselves a bit to make something of the lost object a part of our own to deny that loss. And what was outside is now inside. So this was Freud's way of explaining the process of object loss and how it affects us. Klein had a separate way. And in Klein's opinion, early life object loss leads to the split not being closed properly and you remain in the paranoid schizoid position with all the problems that it entails. So if object loss happens early in life, the split remains open. You don't make a movement from paranoid schizoid position to depressive position, and the internalization of a good, reliable, stable object, which is at the center of psychological and biological health, that does not happen. So this was client's way of explaining that thing. Now this can happen in the adult phase also. In the adult age also, if you face a object loss and if the object loss is severe, it can open up the split, and a depressive position which you once acquired, you may have to reverse it. I mean, you unconsciously it is reversed and you again go back to the paranoid schizoid position. So in the adult stage also, a very heavy object loss can undo the gains of the depressive position and reopen the paranoid schizoid position. And we see this not only in individuals but also in groups. If a community loses something in which it is heavily invested, let us say if India loses one state to China or Pakistan, it would open up our split, and uh, it will not be easy for us to process that object loss. Many people who had strong investment in the ideology of communism had a similar kind of feeling when they saw the fall of Russia. I mean USSR. So these are the various ways of looking at object loss. I have my own way of looking at object loss because I see object loss as very foundational to many of the psychological problems. And I see object loss like this, which I have explained in detail in my Valley Junction model. And the stages are like this. Once the need arises for the object, the search starts. When the search is frustrated and the object does not appear, anger starts. And you attack the object in fantasy. Till the object does not appear, the helplessness and powerlessness comes in. So first powerlessness comes, then helplessness comes, then the pain comes. Very intense pain. After the pain, after the pain, uh, often templates are created. And one of the most common templates is of inferiority. I am not good enough. At times, guilt also is created that I must have done something wrong and therefore I deserve this. Or there is guilt for the anger that we have felt towards the lost object. And all this basket full of very difficult, unpleasant feelings, that is a psychological state into which we are after object loss. And this is what I say the valley state. And how we come out of that valley state depends upon what is our age, how traumatic is the object loss, what is our constitution. And based upon how we come out of it, templates are created. So two people who experience object loss, one may come out to be a healthy person, one may come out to be with somebody with a personality disorder, the third may come out with, let us say, a milder form of a disorder, somebody may come out with just psychosis. So this depends upon some factors like one, what is your constitution? Two, what is the age of object loss? Three, uh, how severe is it? And fourth, very importantly, what were your experiences before the object loss happened? If before the object loss happened, if you had a good experience of the object, then you are better capable to handle the object loss. Importantly, once the object loss happens, let us say it happens at 2 years, 2.5, 3.5, whatever, the subsequent developmental states, developmental phenomena, they get affected by this object loss. So if you have an object loss at 1.5 years, the moment you go into Oedipus with already an object loss trauma, it is very difficult to resolve the Oedipus successfully. So all subsequent psychological developments are affected by a severe traumatic object loss.
You just mentioned that, I mean, during this process of this phenomenon happening, it somehow gets linked up with the split. Can you go into the details?
Yes. Uh, Melanie Klein says that because the good object is not present adequately enough, the split cannot be closed and you cannot move into a depressive position because the good experiences are few and non-good experiences are too many, and therefore you don't want to close the split because you want to save whatever good you have from the overwhelming bad which can destroy the good. So this is one way of looking at it, that if uh, the object is inadequately available, or in other words, object is inadequately gained, or there is a sort of a quasi object loss, that kind of phenomena is extremely linked to uh, the split remaining open, not only in childhood, even in later stages. In adult life also, if you have too many object losses of objects where you are emotionally heavily invested, it can still take you back to the paranoid schizoid position. So this is a very strongly linked phenomena. There is one more element, how the split can open up. Apart from object loss, the split can also open up if you look at Kohut's explanation, where if a healthy self is not created and ego cohesion is low, then any stress from outside, any challenge from outside can crack open or have developed cracks in the ego, which does not have high cohesion, and that also can open up the split. So there is also a cohesion path to opening up the split, apart from the Kleinian path that we have said. But in both cases, uh, presence of a good, reliable, stable object in early childhood uh, being missing is one of the causes of the whole thing. In Kohut's explanation also, Klein's explanation also, the cause of the difficulty is the absence of a good, reliable, stable object in early childhood.
Uh, are there some age junction point when this phenomenon tends to like gain more importance?
Yes, yes. There are some psychologically very important and vulnerable points where this phenomena becomes even more critical and often more traumatic. We can look at 5 years of age, the end of Oedipus, and the beginning of latency. Then we can look at the end of latency and beginning of teenage, the puberty. Then we can look at the midlife crisis, usually 40 to 42. Then we can look at the real beginning of old age after 55. So these are the psychologically very important points where object loss, if it happens, is far more difficult to handle than otherwise. Of course, that does not mean that a very traumatic object loss in other uh, times of the life is not traumatic. Of course, it can be even more traumatic than what happens in these points. But in the normal flow of things, these points are like the soft points on the continuum. And you can see very importantly, for these soft points, in all ancient cultures, there are social ceremonies to provide recognition of the crisis and support to the person and connect the person back to the group to say that this is something everyone has. You are not the only one condemned to suffer this. So to provide him support, to connect him back, to make him more malleable to accepting the natural order of events, right? And to use, if possible, the spiritual and holistic and occult techniques to help the person. In all ancient cultures, we have social ceremonies in all these critical points of life.
Is there psychic object loss?
Uh, in one sense, every object loss is an intrapsychic object loss because the loss is happening inside the mind, not outside. So whether in the outside world there is actual physical loss or there is just distancing, because often uh, if a person becomes even slightly more distant to us, even the closeness reduces, we see it as object loss, as a quasi object loss. Let us say I have a friend and a new person enters the relationship and it becomes a triangle because the other friend is a friend to both of us. I would now feel that my erstwhile friend is now being shared, and therefore there is a kind of a quasi object loss. You can call it a quarter object loss. So, any form of distancing, any form of reduction in closeness also is a form of object loss because object loss itself is on a continuum. So, from reduction of closeness to breaking of a relationship or physically the person moving out, all these are different kinds of object losses, and obviously all of them happen in the mind. uh, what we feel, they may happen in the outside world, may not happen, but in the mind definitely they happen, and because they all happen in the mind, uh, what we know of, we know only what happens in the mind. Therefore in one sense everything is intrapsychic, but what is meant by this is, can we have object losses inside our minds for which there is no corresponding event in the real world? This is what is meant by a strict intrapsychic object loss. And there are two or three ways we can look at it. One is, if we are in a stage of primary narcissism, an object free stage, and things go good, things go less good, things go bad, things go worse. In that stage, when we pass through different states of bliss, of ecstasy, of ordinariness, of fatigue, of tiredness, of torture, all those stages we pass through, of discomfort. In those stages, uh, it is completely intracyclic. Okay? So many of the variety of stages we pass through in the pre-object stage, these are completely intrapsychic object losses. Sorry, intrapsychic losses, not intrapsychic object losses because there is no object, but intrapsychic losses, completely intrapsychic losses. Now the second part comes is we are object making creatures. So we create fantasy objects also, and many of the fantasy objects we create, uh, either it becomes too painful to hold on to them because the reality is so different, or in our own minds we are not able to continue to have a good relationship with even that intrapsychic object, and therefore there is a loss of intrapsychic good object, and this can be a completely fantastical object, or it can be an object of somebody in the real world that we modify and create a dream packaging over that person. So there might be a person in the real world for which whom we are dreaming with an added packaging put on. And because of the reality that we see, there might be a loss inside. So nobody has done anything outside uh, as a crime of commission, but our own projections have been withdrawn, proven wrong, and therefore there is a kind of a loss felt inside, which is more of an intrapsychic nature. And then we have completely imaginative characters created in our mind, in our dreams, and when with those we experience a loss. And this I have put up in one of my talks, dreams I dare not dream again. Similarly, objects I dare not relate again. So I may have created objects in my mind a few years back, and I dare not recreate them because I have experience of reality. So those are completely intrapsychic object losses.
Object loss is quite a rather very difficult and painful phenomenon for any person to pass through in different ways based on one's constitution and all. So, how do we generally cope with it? And is there a possibility of some kind of perfect mourning?
We cope with it in different ways. Uh, One way of coping, as Freud said, is that we cannot really cope completely, and therefore the only way we can manage this is by making some part of the lost object a part of our own, and thereby deny the loss to whatever extent we can. And therefore, Freud said one way to look at our personality is to look at all the accumulations we have made based upon all the losses we have had. That is one way of looking at how we process object loss. We make some part of the lost object a part of our own and go into denial as much as we can in order to keep the pain away because the pain is unbearable. So this is one way of coping with object loss. Second way of coping with object loss is avoidance. Once bitten, twice shy. So, so some people develop a template of after object loss of once bitten, twice shy, and they become avoidant. They keep people at a distance because they fear emotional closeness, because emotional closeness ultimately can lead to object loss and the pain would be unbearable. So better not to get close to anyone than to risk the pain of object loss. The second way in which some people cope. Some people cope with a desperate search for objects. That because they have lost a good object, they have to fill up that vacuum. So they become desperate in search. And some go to the extent of a histrionic search. So there's this group which comes out of object loss with a desperate search for objects. There is another group which comes with the false sense of self-sufficiency and grandiosity, that I don't need anybody. And by doing so, they deny the need for an object, and by doing so, they keep the prospect of object closeness and consequent loss and pain at bay. And then some people take even a more difficult route of becoming exactly like the object to deny the loss completely. So these are some variety of ways in which uh, we cope with object loss, and one creative way is to cope with object loss by engaging with art, and that is by involving oneself in art. One tries to cope with object loss by mourning or by creating objects we once wanted or we once had. So that is another way of coping with object loss. Different groups cope with it differently, but the single phenomena of object loss is like a railway junction. From the same junction, you can go in different directions. So often the starting point is the same, but based upon when it has happened, what is the intensity, what is the constitution, and what were the experiences before it happened, people take different routes out of the object loss, and it leads to formation of different templates. So this is with regard to coping with the object loss. The second question you asked about,
Just one question here.
yeah,
It was about mourning. Yeah, but before that, I mean, I had this question that like people engage in with arts
yeah,
to cope with the object loss. Is engaging with spirituality also, I mean, part of that? I mean, do
yes,
people do that, or is it
yes,
used to cope with
yeah,
object loss?
yeah. That's slightly more controversial question because uh, not only people go into spirituality to overcome object loss because they see all good reliable object in the guru or god. uh, they are also in search of a supra object stage which will take them away from all the pains of the object world, all the frustrations of the object world. And enlightenment also is seen partly, not fully, but partly as a relief from the frustrations of the object world. So this is how it is seen by many. But even more controversial is the point that if you look at people who are in spirituality, even the masters, most of them have suffered object loss, early life object loss. And if you look at the state of enlightenment, it is a uh, it is a sublimate, not sublimated, but it's a very refined version of the oceanic state that Freud depicts. A very sublime, sacred, uh, in ego control, uh, non-pathological, supranatural, supranormal kind of a state which comes close from a distance to the early life oceanic experience, although it's very different. The two are opposites. So there is a pre-object
Yes.
oceanic state and there is a post-object oceanic state.
Right.
So both are two ends of a continuum in one sense. One is the beginning, one is the goal, but they do seem appear comparably similar to a non-believer who tries to reduce the phenomena in a secular frame. But this creates another important question that I was referring to, that we talked once about the purpose of pathology. And there we talked about one possibility which one of my mentors, Dr. Maheshwari, used to say, not mentor, one of my teachers, Dr. Maheshwari, used to say. He talked about, he wrote to me once and he said, the spiritual principles are primary, all empirical principles are secondary and derived. And when we apply this philosophical principle to psychology and the purpose of pathology in particular, we come to the point that maybe early life object loss, no matter how traumatic it is, maybe it is investment for moving towards a spiritual life. So it may be a phenomena which is associated with psychological losses but spiritual gains.
So now we come to our next question, that is there a possibility of perfect mourning as a part of this process?
Uh, Perfect mourning is an ideal, right? It is like, can you exhaust the unconscious? And it's very difficult to exhaust the unconscious because it is too powerful compared to our conscious mind and our ability to work upon the unconscious mind. We are working with Pentium 2 and trying to modify a server which has 10 chips of Pentium 10. So it's a very difficult prospect. That is one part. The second part is, uh, conceptually, hypothetically assume that somebody brings out a technique to more completely all the pain that is inside. Let us say it is done. Then what about the rest of the life? Can anybody have a pain-free life? Can anybody have a life where all desires are met? Obviously, no. So even if theoretically it was possible, perfect mourning, life would still continue to bring pain and it would still start accumulating inside. So perfect mourning at a point, even if it is possible, unless it is a perfect mourning moment to moment, which is a completely theoretical situation, it is not practically possible. So practically speaking, perfect mourning is not possible, but we try to get as near to the ideal as possible. That is one part. The second part is, uh, there are two components to it. One, mourning what has been accumulated, and two, not to allow new things to accumulate or reduce them as far as possible. Now, the second part that calls for profound wisdom and spiritual practice. So, there is one element of psychotherapy to mourn all that has been accumulated and then to take a spiritual approach so that the new material is not created much. Now, once both of them are done, you are left with a very small amount of accumulated unmourned entities. And for that, to clear out those last things and to change your schema completely in terms of the desired schema, that is where we require those rare spiritual events, what we call enlightenment. That only after that people report that they don't have new accumulation or there is no need for mourning felt. Now that enlightenment process is a rare process. We don't know much about the psychological part of that process. It's not a very well understood process. It's a rare process and a very vehemently denied process by those who are non-believers, the rational academic community. So that is the situation that is in. But uh, I personally am on the side of believers on this point, and I feel that for the last remaining 20-25% of unmourned things, it is the rare event or spiritual or occult events uh, which can help us to clear out those last parts. So this is how it is with regard to mourning, but the practical wisdom is that regardless of whether rare events happen or not happen, uh, to use psychotherapy, spirituality, and other holistic healing techniques to clear out the mourning process as far as possible.
Does resistance to gain perpetuate loss?
In some cases, yes, because in some cases, what you see is the early object loss leads to a narcissistic rage or envy. So there are three things. narcissistic rage, envy, and fear of object loss again. So these are the three things which actually prevent object gain and therefore perpetuate object loss. And this takes the person into what I call the tragic holding state. The state is tragic, but the person does not want to come out of that state. He somehow feels secure because he has been in that state for quite a long time. And the unknown, even if it is better than the known, seems very anxiety provoking. So the movement seems very anxiety provoking, and therefore these three things, they prevent object gain and perpetuate object loss and all its consequences. First is narcissistic rage. The rage because the object once betrayed, and the rage because somebody else can be so good as I am, and the rage that I am not self-sufficient. This whole aspect of dependency and vulnerability, and the fact that the all good object is not in my complete control. So there is an element of narcissistic rage which does not allow new emotional closeness and therefore new emotional object gain to undo the object loss once suffered, the result of which has been narcissism and consequently narcissistic rage. Second element is envy, that because of envy of the good object, the person refuses to internalize the good object, because instead of welcoming, assimilating, he is busy fighting the goodness of the good object. So the good object is available for internalization, but he is busy fighting because of envy. He wants to destroy the good object instead of allowing the good object to come inside of him and enhance his own goodness. He is busy destroying the goodness of the good object because it's too full of envy. And the third is of avoidance, that once bitten, twice shy. Because of early life object loss, the fear of object loss and consequent pain is so high that any new object gain or any new object closeness is, one is mortally afraid of it, terrified of it. And that threat is so high, it's such a horror that one does not want to even correct or dare to experiment to correct the early life object loss. So that risk avoidance is so high that even when object gain is possible, you just don't want to take the risk, fearing the pain you once felt. So these are the areas where, these are the reasons where uh, when a good object is available for internalization and living with, to undo the traumatic experience of early childhood object loss, one does not move forward on the path of object gain and indirectly therefore perpetuates object loss of early life and its consequences in one's life.
How do we heal from this severe or this terrifying thing in therapy?
In therapy, two things happen. One is we are provided a safe, supportive space to recollect our tragedies, our losses, and undergo mourning without being judged, without being criticized, without being countered. And because of that safe and supportive space, we are able to successfully or partly successfully undergo mourning. So that is one way in which object loss is dealt with. And object losses with intensity ranging from mild to moderate can easily be dealt with in this way. The second element is revisiting those states of intense object losses, which is not possible to do without the support of a therapist. It is too much to ask of an individual to do it alone. So revisiting those states where intense object losses happened, the state just after the loss was recognized. Those very difficult states you can revisit, and every time you revisit, the intensity is lessened. You become cognitively more aware of it, more integration assimilation takes place, and slowly catharsis starts in small amount, and your ego tolerance of affect goes up. The second way in which it happens. Third way in which it happens is because of our search for good objects and our projections, the therapist becomes the good, reliable, stable object, and we internalize the therapist as a good, reliable, stable object. So the conduct of the therapist and our own projections, the two together, make the therapist appear to us as a good, reliable, stable object, and the frame also contributes. So the frame, the actual conduct of the therapist, and our projections, the three together make the therapist appear as good, reliable, stable object, and we internalize that over a long period of therapy unconsciously. This internalization of a good, reliable, stable object helps us in overcoming the early life object loss and its consequences. So these are some of the elements which happen in therapy. One of the elements that also happens is the quietness. It's very important. Often in therapy, you speak something and you hear it in that quiet space. The therapist is not speaking anything. This speaking, expressing ourselves and hearing ourselves, our innermost thoughts and feelings in a quiet, safe space is healing for us. And the at times even you are not speaking and the therapist is not speaking, and that silent space, that safe silent space, that also gets internalized over a long period of time. And one realizes it's possible to be so peaceful and silent within oneself, which is not a everyday normal experience. So this sort of a micro form of capacity to be alone, feeling the peace and bliss inside, that also is very important, because that profit of silence, so to speak, is also very important in a different way, through which the part of the mind internalizes peace, bliss, safety, silence, composure, stability, and through that, some of the consequences of object loss, they are much better dealt with. And some people go to the extent of saying that this peace, bliss, silence is also internalized as a good soothing object inside. So these are some of the ways in which object loss gets dealt with in therapy, apart from the normal verbalized, explicit discussions which take place, which bring more clarity, make the unconscious conscious, do some form of catharsis, which is a regular movement in therapy.
Uh, we come to our last question. Uh, do holistic healing and spirituality have something to offer on this count?
Yes, if we look at three important elements here. First, mourning the consequences of early life object loss. Two, changing our way of looking at the world and our schemas so that new object losses don't happen. And third, internalization of good objects. If we look at these three elements in the context we are discussing, holistic healing and spirituality both have tools for it. For mourning also, for internalization of a good object also, and for preventing new object losses and consequent negative emotions also. For all the three, we have uh, perspectives, knowledge, approaches, and even tools in both spirituality and holistic healing. In holistic healing, homeopathy, Reiki, pranic healing, pranayam, yoga, these are very important areas or disciplines who have a basket full of knowledge and tools to help us in those three elements, in the three stages, the three goals. And when we come to spirituality, meditation, visualization exercise, certain rituals, idol therapy, uh, certain forms of music, and the whole idea of being guided by a guru. All of this put together, that we don't have time here to go into details because each point is an area by itself. But both holistic healing and spirituality have each a basket full of uh, knowledge and tools to address this whole phenomena of object loss. And you can combine the two baskets to create a much bigger basket and use it along with a basket of tools that psychotherapy has. And that creates a really effective holistic healing package.
So, one question I have is that earlier you mentioned that in therapy, mild and moderate cases get healed by a certain therapeutic process. Uh, and also, like holistic healing and spirituality can also help to help such cases. But what about the severe cases? I mean, do we need to bring all the three together, or how does it work in severe
In
cases?
severe cases, we will have to bring all the three together: psychotherapy, spirituality, and holistic healing. And even that may not be enough. We may have to resort to psychiatric drugs also, because severe case is a different basket altogether. So when the severe case is there, uh, it is always safer and better to do psychiatric drugs and use these treatments as add-ons, right? Psychotherapy, holistic healing, spirituality as add-on. And as the person feels better and reduces the need for drugs, this part can be increased. But it is too risky in severe cases not to have the person under psychiatric care. And if it becomes acute, then there is no question of anything but to go for psychiatric care, because that is something, it is too risky not to be under psychiatric care.
Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for this interesting and very in-depth discussion on this concept of object loss. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.